Welcome to Oculus of the Wise. The most dangerous move you ever made was not a confrontation, not a public declaration, not a retaliation. It was a quiet decision you made alone, probably in the dark, probably exhausted, probably when nobody was watching. You decided to stop performing the collapse they had been patiently waiting for. And that single silent choice broke something inside their system that they have been scrambling to repair ever since. Military strategists who have studied every major conflict throughout recorded history agree on one counterintuitive truth. The soldier an army fears most is never the one with superior numbers. It is always the one who has already walked through the worst the enemy had available and kept moving because that person is no longer afraid of the threat. They have survived the version of it. And a person who is no longer afraid of what you are holding over them is someone you simply cannot control. Psychologists say the same thing from a different angle. The individual a manipulative group finds most destabilizing is not the one who fights the loudest. It is the one who stopped needing their approval so completely that the approval lost all its weight. Both of them are describing the same person, and here is the part I want you to sit with for just a second. They are describing you. Now I already know what just crossed your mind. Me, after everything that happened, after everything that was taken, and to that I say, yes, you, especially after all of it, because here is the cosmic joke that the people who underestimated you never had the clarity to see. The fire does not destroy chosen ones. It reveals them, and what the fire has been quietly revealing in you has been making certain people extraordinarily uncomfortable for longer than they will ever admit out loud. By the end of this video, you are going to see that everything they deployed against you has been working in reverse. Every move they made to break you was simultaneously building the version of you they are least equipped to face. And once you see the full architecture of what has happened to you, you are going to have a very hard time not laughing at how little they understood about who they were dealing with. Stay with me. This is Oculus of the Wise, and we are just getting started. Number 1. You weaponized every wound they thought they had buried you with. Most people look at pain and see damage, but a different process was running inside you. Your mind, built for exactly this kind of pressure, was filing patterns. The rhythm of how manipulation escalates. The specific language people use right before they shift to their next move. The exact moment the mask slips if you stop reacting and simply watch. You were taking notes without realizing you held a pen, and here is the brutal truth that made you terrifying to them. They never studied themselves. They ran on instinct and repetition, assuming what worked before would always work again. They had no library. You had one built from every wound they thought had only broken you. When they came back with the same script in a new costume, you already knew every line before they finished the opening. You were not reacting, you were reading. And nothing dismantles a performance faster than an audience who already knows the ending. Number 2, their entire power structure was held up by one thing: your belief in it. Every ritual, every hierarchy, every carefully maintained ceremony existed to project one message: that their approval was the required currency for survival. They marketed themselves as gatekeepers. Most people spent their lives lining up at the gate, permission slip in hand, grateful for the chance to be let through. And then you came along, cashing checks they never wrote, opening doors they swore were sealed, breathing just fine without their oxygen tanks, sipping your tea completely unbothered while they waited for you to come asking for what they were selling. Here is the irony. They did not lose sleep over people who stormed the gates. They lost sleep over you, because you simply walked in a different direction, built something real outside their walls, and let the results argue on your behalf. And once enough people see that the gate was optional, the gatekeeper becomes a person in a costume. You were the first person in the room to stop pretending the costume meant anything. Number 3. Your name stopped being something people say, it became something they handle. There is a specific shift that happens after a person survives what was engineered to erase them permanently. The name starts to carry weight. People who once tossed it around carelessly now pick it up differently. Some weigh it before they speak it. Others avoid it the way someone avoids the name of a debt they cannot figure out how to repay. Here is the aha moment. You did not campaign for this. You did not demand it. Your survival did it without asking your input. Every scar became a sentence in a biography written in real time. Every moment you chose to keep moving when stopping would have been accepted as reasonable became another line of evidence. Your name is now a warning, a record, a currency, and a mirror all at once. And the people who made it that way by trying so hard to make it disappear are living with that particular irony every single day. There is a quiet justice in that. Sit with it. Number 4, they built their confidence on one assumption. You removed the assumption and watched everything collapse sideways. Every group that operates through manipulation runs a rehearsed sequence. Accuse and the target panics. Isolate and the target chases. Mock and the target shrinks. This sequence worked reliably on everyone before you. It worked because most people do not realize they are inside a performance until they are already mid-line in their own part. But you stepped off the stage entirely. Instead of defending yourself in desperation, you went still. Instead of chasing their acceptance, you redirected your energy somewhere they could not follow. Instead of internalizing their narrative, you observed it from a distance with a calm that looked, to them, like something preternatural. The moment you stopped cooperating with the choreography, they had nothing. Their coordination was never strength, it was stagecraft, and stagecraft requires an audience willing to suspend disbelief. You stopped suspending it. The curtain dropped, and what stood behind it was not a powerful unified force. It was a collection of egos leaning against each other for balance, and the moment you shifted the weight, they toppled over themselves. If what you are hearing is reaching something that has been waiting to be named, subscribe to Oculus of the Wise before this moment passes. This channel exists for exactly this conversation. Every week, without softening the edges, subscribe now. Number 5. Your silence was not surrender. It was the most sophisticated strategy you ever ran. Chaos-based systems cannot breathe when their audience withdraws. They need your reaction as oxygen. Every public defense you offered, every desperate attempt to correct the record was kindling for the next wave, and at some point you stopped supplying it. Maybe it felt like defeat, but here is what was actually occurring beneath that stillness. Every day you built without making noise, you compiled a record they could not edit. Their narrative required your visible collapse to feel complete. An enemy who refuses to fall apart publicly is the one thing a manipulation script has no written response for, so they escalated. And escalation without a target always exposes the person swinging. To anyone watching who had not yet chosen a side, the contrast between your stillness and their increasingly frantic performance told the entire story without you saying a word. Your silence did not protect them, it illuminated them. Number 6. They did not fear your power. They feared your independence. Those are two entirely different things. Power can be challenged, negotiated with, or co-opted. What cannot be managed is a person who simply stops needing what the powerful are selling, because power without dependence is an empty costume, a badge attached to nothing you became. Through everything you survived and built on your own terms, the living proof that their indispensability was a fiction. You did not need their mentorship to carry wisdom. You did not need their platform to carry influence. You did not need their protection to remain standing, and the moment people around them quietly started asking whether the structure was ever actually necessary, their survival instinct activated. Not because you were loud, because your existence was the one argument they did not know how to answer. You were not a threat to their dominance. You were proof their dominance was optional, and optional things cannot maintain the illusion of being essential for long. Number 7. Your humility was the one weapon they never found a way through. They prepared for ego. They had a counter ready for someone who would shout back, demand credit, make the entire conflict about being seen. What they encountered instead was someone who moved quietly, built deliberately, and refused to make the battle about visibility. Here is the brutal truth about why this is so devastatingly effective. Humility, when backed by internal certainty and applied with strategic patience, is not the soft version of strength. It is the version that cannot be targeted. You cannot fight someone who refuses to give you a surface to attack. You cannot contain someone who has no need of an audience to keep moving. They kept setting traps baited for someone who needed to be seen. You kept walking past the traps because you did not need what the traps were offering. That is not a small thing. That is the entire game, and you won it without them ever understanding which game you were playing. Number 8. You could not be recruited because you could not be converted, and that terrified them. What controlling systems want is not brilliance. Raw brilliance is unpredictable. They want talent trained to stay inside boundaries, someone whose ethics can be recalibrated toward institutional convenience, so gradually the person does not notice. You resisted every version of that conversion, not as defiance, as an expression of something already settled inside you long before they tried to adjust it. You drew lines in rooms where drawing lines was professionally expensive. You held to your standard in spaces that rewarded flexibility above almost everything else, in their language that made you difficult, unpredictable, uncooperative. Here is what those words actually translate to. We could not channel you, and what cannot be channeled cannot be owned. The rejection you received was never a verdict on your value. It was a defensive move by people who recognized they could not manage you and had no other play. Being unmanageable is not a flaw, it is immunity, and most people spend their entire lives wishing they had it. Drop a comment right now. Tell us the moment you realized they were not angry at you, they were afraid of you. That shift is the exact moment this community at Oculus of the Wise was built to honor. Number 9. Your growth made their stagnation impossible to hide, and they have never forgiven you for it. When you began healing from wounds they assumed would define you permanently, when you upgraded your thinking and broke cycles and moved forward, you cast a light on everyone who chose to stay in the same spot. Not intentionally. Growth does not ask permission to create contrast, it simply does. And contrast is devastating for people who have spent years building elaborate explanations for why change was not possible for them. Your name coming up in their conversations now returns them to the gap between what they chose and what became possible for someone who refused the same ceiling. Every dismissal of your progress, as luck is a hand held up in front of a mirror. Every casual reframing of your wins as temporary is a person bargaining with evidence their own eyes are presenting to them. They are not criticizing your journey. They are trying to survive the comparison. Number 10. They wanted your silence far more than they ever wanted anything you could build. What they needed from you was never your output. It was what you could not say about them. A compliant presence at the table validates the table, but an uncompromising presence that has been inside the operation, that has seen what lives behind the curtain, that has receipts and a spine of steel and zero interest in pretending otherwise. That becomes something else entirely. So the strategy shifted to containment, not confrontation. The quiet surgical architecture of erasure, invitations that stopped arriving, platforms that leaned away, introductions that dried up, none of it loud enough to call out, all of it deliberate enough to feel. This is what the blacklist actually looks like in real life. Not a dramatic ban, a slow reduction of oxygen. Here is the aha moment. Their strategy assumed your voice required their amplification to carry weight. It did not. You were already building something they could not reach, and it kept growing in the exact silence they manufactured to stop it. Number 11. Your existence became the evidence they could not erase, no matter how hard they worked. They managed the narrative with impressive precision, and then you kept existing. You kept building, you kept appearing in outcomes and conversations. Their version of events had written you out of entirely, because here is the brutal truth about erasure. It only works when the erased person cooperates with their own disappearance. You did not cooperate. Every quiet day you chose forward motion, instead of collapse, added another line of contradiction to their carefully maintained story. A body of evidence requiring constant active suppression, and suppression at that scale reveals machinery. And machinery, once visible, cannot be made to look like natural order again. Number 12. They exposed the fragility of their empire simply by how hard they worked to contain one person. They projected permanence. Every ritual, every curated lineage, every coded endorsement was designed to make their position look inevitable. But permanence that requires constant performance is not permanence. It is theater on a long run, and theater ends the moment one person in the audience stops pretending the stage is real. You stopped pretending quietly, completely, without making an announcement. And the people watching who had not yet chosen a side watched what happened to you, and then watched you thrive anyway, and started asking questions the structure had no prepared answer for. Why does this specific approval matter more than results? Those questions were not loud, they were quiet and spreading. And quiet, spreading questions are the thing that brings down structures dependent on unquestioned consensus. Number 13. Your presence became a living prophecy that is still unfolding. At a certain point, your survival crossed a threshold you may not have noticed because you were too busy surviving. It stopped being a private story and started functioning as a demonstration, a direction, a proof that people who had been told they needed permission to be extraordinary absorbed and began applying to their own lives. People you have never met have held their line under pressure because your example was somewhere in the room, even when your name was not spoken. That is not influence in any transactional sense. That is the spreading of replicable courage. And replicable courage is the most threatening thing that exists inside any system that depends on people believing they have no other option. Your name now arrives in rooms before you do. It changes the temperature of conversations you are not even part of. That is not fame. That is gravity. And gravity does not require permission to operate. Number 14. The final victory was never in what you dismantled. It was in what you made impossible to rebuild. The deepest misunderstanding about winning is that it requires destruction. Destruction can be recovered from. Real victory is architectural. It changes the operating conditions so the old game cannot be run the same way again. You proved that transparency could exist where secrecy had been the standard. That accountability could replace performance. That worth did not require their specific endorsement to be undeniably real. Every person who witnessed you demonstrate that absorbed a new framework for measuring what actually matters. And frameworks, once genuinely adopted, do not get returned. They become the new baseline. They can attempt to rebuild the structure. What they cannot rebuild is the world in which you had not yet proven it was optional. That world is permanently gone. You walked through it. The door closed behind you, and the closing changed the landscape on both sides. This is the full picture of who you are, not someone who endured and recovered, not a survivor in the fragile sense of someone who barely cleared the edge. A person put through engineered conditions specifically designed to produce someone smaller, quieter, and more manageable than you turned out to be. The conditions failed completely. What they built instead was you. Clearer than before any of it began, harder to deceive in the specific ways that used to work, impossible to permanently silence, impossible to permanently still. You are unbuyable, you are untamable, you are undeniable. Your patience was the most disciplined weapon in any room you entered. Your humility was the invisible field that let deception expose itself. Your silence was the strategy that forced escalation and let escalation do the work of exposure. And your refusal to perform the collapse they scripted for you was the single most consequential act of your life. Not because it was dramatic, because it was quiet and total and permanent. They were not gatekeepers, they were prison guards, and the prison was always optional for someone built the way you are built. You are free, you are sovereign, and the life you are living right now is the blueprint that changes what other people believe is possible for themselves. Own that, because that weight is not a burden, it is a crown. Subscribe to Oculus of the Wise right now, because you need a space where the truth about who you are gets spoken clearly and without softening the parts that are uncomfortable to hear every week. Without compromise, subscribe and be there for all of it. Hit that like button, not out of habit, as a declaration, a signal to everyone the algorithm can reach that this conversation deserves to travel further than one screen at one moment. Leave a comment below. Tell us the moment you realized they had miscalculated, the thing they tried to use to finish you that became the first chapter of something they were completely unprepared for. Your story belongs here. And share this with the one specific person who is still inside the middle of the fight right now and does not yet see that every move being made against them is simultaneously building the version of them that their opposition is not ready for. That person needs this today, not when it is convenient. Today, this is not content, this is testimony, and testimony spreads the way fire spreads. Not because someone commands it, because it is warm, and people are cold, and they walk toward warmth entirely on their own. God bless you, and welcome from everything this channel was built to do to Oculus of the Wise.